Leslie from Joleelee Creations, and today we're going to be sewing up one of my favorite, most requested patterns, the Zip and Go by ENDesigns. This pattern is super fun, it's very unique in its construction, and it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. It features a front pocket for your cell phone, and it's pretty large and fits a variety of phones, including large iPhones. We have a side zipper pocket that has a money slot and card slots, and on the opposite side it has a small zipper pocket. If we flip to the other side of our pouch, we have another zipper pocket, and that pocket's perfect for chapstick, keys, anything like that. This bag is the perfect bag to go to concerts, conventions, parks, anything on the go where you just need a few items to take with you. It's the perfect size for that. This bag is constructed with all vinyl exterior. It has light interfacing of Decaville light on the flap and the front pocket. On the inside is a cotton woven that I've interfaced with a light SF101 equivalent. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below. I'd love to help you out as you sew this, and I hope you enjoy. So first, let's go over our pieces. We have our front and back flap. I have interfaced the entire piece with Decaville light. I know that my machine can handle that. If yours cannot, I do recommend keeping it out of the seam allowance. We have our front exterior pocket. It's a whole piece that we fold in half. We have our main exterior front, our main exterior back. I do add 2 D-rings to connect the crossbody straps, so I have made double of those. We have our zippers. We have our zipper ends, our crossbody strap here, and for the lining we have our credit card slot wings, our zipper pocket, our zipper pocket facing. We have 3 lining pieces, and we have our card slot fabric. All fabric pieces I have interfaced with a SF101 equivalent. Again, like I mentioned before, my machine can handle having the interfacing in the seam allowance, so if yours cannot, you can keep that trimmed out of the seam allowances on all the interior lining pieces. That will help reduce the bulk a little bit. Because I am using a yellow interior, I am going to work on these pieces first so that I can change my thread to the brown exterior thread and not have to go back and forth. So this part will be a little bit out of order, but the final assembly will all be the same. So we're going to go ahead and start with our card slot piece. I have marked on the front the lines that were given in the pattern on the front and the back. And what we're going to do to keep these card slots perfect, the first step is to make sure when you cut it out, as perfect as you can get the rectangle, the better that the card slots will turn out. A lot of times if your card slots are crooked, to cut from the beginning, then they're going to end up a little wonky in the end. The way this pattern is we're going to make peaks on the marks that we had made on the back. I do like to mark both sides, that way I have 2 marks to go by, and I'm going to fold that and pinch the marks here, making sure to line it up with the edge the best that I can, and we're going to crease that there. Again, we're going to move down to the next peak here. I'm going to pinch at the marks. I'm going to line up this edge the best I can. That's going to help keep it square. And we're going to crease the fabric there. Move down to our 3rd mark on the back. Pinch our marks. And crease it well. You can use an iron, but I don't really find it's necessary. You can just crease it with your fingers. On the front side, I did the same thing. I do use chalk pencil on the front so that I can mark a little bit in and you won't be able to tell on the fabric. And the same thing, pinch and crease. Moving down to our next marks, pinch, line it up as best as we can, and crease. And then our last marks on the front, we're gonna pinch, line them up, and crease. So then now we can take our folds and they will accordion very nicely together, and your sides should line up pretty perfect. Like I said, the key to getting good card slots every time is starting out with a good rectangle to begin with. I do have another video before this one that shows how to cut perfect rectangles and squares every time. So now we're going to take our card slots over to the machine and we're going to top stitch along the tops of all 3 slits here. So we're going to fold back our top piece, make sure that's out of the way. And I'm using about a 3.5 or 4 stitch length on my machine. Back stitch really well. And top stitch across. So to fix this, they had a little thread jam here. I pulled out enough stitches to get some extra thread here. I could pull it all the way out and start over from the beginning, but it seems it looks okay, so I like to show you how I troubleshoot. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to get my awl. I'm going to pull the threads through the back side here. Now I have 2 long enough threads. If it's not long enough for you, you may have to pull a couple more stitches out on the front. And it's okay if you do. Don't worry. Or you can just pull them all out, iron your holes, and start over. We're going to want to tie this back here. Like I said, if it's not long enough, pull a couple more stitches. It's not gonna hurt to pull a couple more out. So come back on the underside. We're gonna pull this apart. You can see where the 2 stitches connect on the inside. We have a long enough thread here. Tie a knot. Tie it a couple times. You can either trim and burn your tails, or you can just leave them long. No one's ever going to see inside there. Now, I'm going to put my needle back down in that last stitch that I started, and I'm going to stitch, and it should line up in the same holes. You can, since it's cotton, you can take your iron and you can iron these holes, and they'll be a little bit smaller. Because we'll need to tie it off, I'm going to leave a little bit longer tails when I start. Dropping my needle in that same hole where I just stopped. And I'm going to continue stitching. So now we're left with our tails where we just started. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to open it back up, and it should be right close to where we tied our threads off the last time. We're just going to fish them out back here. If you give this one a tug, it should come through. So we have one of our 2 threads. If you lose your thread, looks like I pulled it through the back there, that's okay. Take your needle and stick it in the hole we want it to go in to stitch. Long thread through, pull through to the back. So now we have both of our long threads, tails on the back side. Tie it off. And since this one's a bit long, I will trim that. And that's how we troubleshoot broken thread on our card slots here, where you'll never notice that we fixed anything without having to start over. You can't see any of the holes there where we stitched before. And now we can continue on doing our next one. Now we have our card slots all top stitched. We need to top stitch down the middle of the bottom card slots here, avoiding our cash pocket to separate the card slots. Take my chalk pencil, and we just need them on the card slot pocket here. Then I'm going to mark about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch from the bottom, and I'll explain more in a little while, but we want to make sure our top stitching stops down here so that when we trim the excess off the bottom, we aren't cutting through those stitches. So I'm going to pull this money slot out, and I'm going to start at this mark here that I made, and that's where I'm going to back stitch. And I'm stitching all the way up to this top stitch line here that I made on the top card slot. We want to make sure we don't go above that stitch line, or we'll close off that money slot. We're going to top stitch really well there. Then I pull this extra thread from the back, from the top stitch, and I trim those back here. That just makes sure that there's not a little extra thread on the front from us trimming. So the same thing with the bottom here. Just pull both threads to the back side and trim those there. But just make sure that there's not a little thread sticking out on the top. So now that we have our pockets divided, we're going to take our credit card slot pieces and we're going to line it up with the top of our credit card slots. Just going to clip those in place here. And you can see that there's a little bit excess on the bottom, and that's where we need to trim off of our credit card slots. So that's why I wanted to stop the top stitching here, because if we back stitch down here, then when we go to trim that off, it just cuts our stitching through and it's more likely to pull out later on. Take our other wing here, just gonna clip it on. Then we're gonna stitch down both sides to secure those wings. Back stitch real well. And then we're going to repeat on the other side. On this side, because our pockets are angled down, they may catch on the bottom of your presser foot on the throat plate. So just keep an eye on that, that it's not bunching up underneath there. And so now this step, it's been really important to me to kind of help reduce the bulk when putting together the final steps of the pattern. I want to trim the seam allowance here, leaving a slight bit at the top so the stitching doesn't come out. But we really want to angle that down so that when we add it to the zipper, we don't have that bulk in our pocket. Kind of helps keep everything clean. So now we're going to open up these wings. We're going to press them really well with our fingers, or you could take them to the iron if you'd like. And we're going to top stitch down those. Back stitching at the beginning and the end. Again, this part here is where it gets pretty bulky, so if you have a machine that you think may struggle, that's why you may want to keep it out of the seam allowance on your lining, your interfacing out of the seam allowance. So now we have our card slot pockets, we have our cash pocket, we have our card slots here, and we need to trim down the excess. So we can take another piece of our lining and we can mark our centers here to make it a little easier. So we're going to line it up to the top. And so we can line up our marks here with our center seams that we've made. And then we need to trim the excess off here. So you can see that if our stitching was way down here, even where I was at was still a little bit low. So we just really want to make sure that that back stitching is higher for us so that we can trim that down without any issues. So now that our card slot pocket is trimmed down, we can set that aside. So now we want to work on our interior zipper pocket. So for this pattern, I am using a number 5 zipper. The template that comes with the pattern is for number 3 zipper. So I'm going to show you how I use my ruler guide for a zipper that's smaller than this guide. So we know that this is the length of our zipper here. This actually fits pretty well, even though it's a little bit short. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up on this end and make sure all the edges are lined up all the way around. I'm going to take my pen and I'm just going to draw the rectangle on part of that side. So now I can go to this side and I can close off the other end using the same method that I did here. So just want to make sure that end's lined up, everything's lined up, and now I can just close it off there. So now we have our guide for our number 5 zipper. So I'm going to mark the centers on this. And we've already marked our centers on here. So we can line up the center to our lining piece. And we're going to stitch around the box here. What I found for stitching these with the industrial machine and the thicker thread is that just making sure that your points are exact. I also do not start in the corner, because if I start in the corner, then that's where my back stitch is going to be with my thread. So I do start closer towards the middle of the top area. That way when I back stitch there, it's a little bit thicker instead of having the extra thread at the end. And I don't need a back stitch a lot. I can always run over my threads, but I don't need that bulk in the seams. So I'm just stitching around the box here, making sure when I get to that corner that the point is exactly in the corner. So same thing, I want it pretty precise going down the sides. Lifting up my needle, making sure it lands right in that pivot point. Again, making sure to be right in that corner. And go up this side. So just like that, we've stitched around our zipper box. And we have the bulk of the thread here instead of in the corners. So if we have that back stitch right in here, it's going to make it really hard to get a nice corner. So however you need to, if you need to mark, you can certainly mark down the middle of the box, leaving a small triangle at the end. You can use an X-Acto knife, or you can just take your scissors, fold it in half, and just snip the very center here, and then that will give you an opening to cut down the middle. Now, because we have a whole lot going in on this side with the thread, the markings, I flip it over and I get a nice clean visual of our thread. We want these corners to go as close to that corner thread as we can without cutting them. So we're just gonna little snips until we can get to that corner. So same thing with this side. Snip, snip until we can get to that corner. And just like that, you can kind of check your corners to make sure that they go all the way in. If there's any little bit of extra fabric there, sometimes that can make the pocket pucker. Now we want to fold this and crease it really well. This will help it turn really easy and give us a nice crisp line on the other side. So now we're going to tuck it in and turn this facing through our hole to the back side. If you need to, you can add a clip here to hold it while we work on getting this all smoothed out. We want this crease to be as creased as possible so that when we add our zipper, it lays nice and flat. So you can see here on this side, because we got those corners nice and tight, there's hardly any pucker. So we're just going to press that down. And since it's cotton, you can take it over to your iron and press it really well. Just going to add a clip there to hold that, and there we have our zipper facing. So now we want to work on the pocket for our zipper. We're going to take our short zipper for the zipper, and we're going to stitch it on to our pocket lining, just a hair over 1/8 of an inch. Back stitching low at the beginning. We don't want to stitch more than 1/8 of an inch, or that will be visible in our zipper pocket window. Flip up the bottom of our pocket to the opposite end of our zipper, because when we open this zipper, we want to be able to see into the pocket. It's going to be laying like this. You unzip your pocket, you want to see the inside. So line up our sides the best we can. If you need to use double-sided tape here to hold your zipper onto your fabric, you can do that. Or you can just crease your fabric, and it'll kind of stay pretty well for you. Back stitch low. So now we have our interior zipper pocket. We need to add our zipper pull. a few little loose guys here. So by singeing it with a lighter, it singes all those and makes it easier for the zipper to go on. So to add our zipper pull, we want to see which tooth is the highest. Because I'm right-handed and it works a little bit better, I always like my right-hand side to be the top tooth. When I separate my zipper, I'm going to stick it on with that right side first because that was our highest tooth, and then enter the other side. Now we want to look in, and I can see that the right side is just a hair taller, but we need them even. So I'm just going to readjust a tad and push it on straight. So now I have just one tooth above, just like we started before I opened the zipper, and that will give you your zipper without any bubbles. So we have our zipper there. Gonna add 1/8 inch double-sided tape to the top of my zipper over that stitching that we just did, but not going past the ends here because I don't need it to stick anywhere that it doesn't need to be. On the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to show you one other trick that I like to do for sewing on these zippers to the pocket. I'm going to take my chalk pencil and I'm going to take my grid ruler. And this is a 1x12 and it has the grids on it, so I know that I'm going to top stitch an 1/8 inch around it. So I'm going to put the edge, the corner edge, with 1/8 on the top and 1/8 on the side, and I'm just going to put a little corner turning dot right there with my pencil. And I'm going to do the same thing to all 4 corners, and those will be our pivot points. Now if you've seen the custom zipper overlays that we do, we have an option for them all to come with the pivot points because I do this on every single pocket that I do. I hand mark an 1/8 inch to give me the turning points. It only takes a couple of seconds once you get the hang of it using this ruler. So now I have my 4 turning points for my zipper. Going to remove the double-sided tape. And I want my zipper to open from the left to right. So I'm just going to make sure my zipper is the right way. Sometimes the zipper gets stuck on the double-sided tape. And we want to place this down centered in our box. Check the back side. It should line up perfect with our zipper facing that we added before. So now we need to stitch on our pocket. I'm going to flip up the pocket so that we don't stitch it closed. And we're going to start at our bottom point, stitch across the bottom, and land ending at our bottom point here. Now if you want to back stitch, that's fine. I prefer to leave longer threads so I can pull it to the back and tie it. So I'm going to pull my threads long, drop it right into the mark that we made, and top stitch at 1/8 all the way across, moving the zipper as we get closer. When you get close to that last stitch, you can lift up and walk in those last 2 stitches. So now we have our threads, we can pull our long tails to the back and tie these guys off. We want to leave a little tail, but it doesn't need to be excessive. So we're just going to trim those down. Now we're going to push our pocket back down. And we need to finish our top stitching. So I'm going to drop it in the same hole that we ended and stitch around the rest of the box. Now that we've stitched around the box, just going to tie off our final two ends. So now we need to stitch up the sides to close up our zipper. So we want to carefully pull back our front panel and just stitch up, closing the zipper. And I do like to back stitch really well at the beginning and then back stitch well over the zipper as well. Close up the other side. Another unnecessary bulk area that I've came across is this top piece of our zipper interfacing that we had before. While it really helps with adding the zipper, I think at this step we can go ahead and trim that off. I'm going to make sure we're not cutting into our zipper tape, that we're just cutting that excess off. And that'll give us a little bit of extra room when we're sewing this on to the zipper at a later step. If you have extra zipper tape here, you can go ahead and trim those off now. And just make sure to cinch the ends so it doesn't fray. Alright, so now we have our zipper pocket complete and our card slots complete. So that's going to be one side pocket together. And then we have our other side pocket lining here. So we're going to put those aside for now and we're going to work on our exterior. Okay, for our exterior, we're going to need a couple things to start with. One is going to be prepping our zippers. Now we want our zippers to be turned down at the ends. The easiest way I've found to do this is by using pins and just simply separating the zipper, folding it under to pinch it together, and then pushing it back against your finger. So I'm going to pinch it and push it flat up against the zipper. So the pinch line is going to go right up against the bottom of that zipper. The fold should be on the back side and it's going to look sort of like a little triangle. Right there is our goal. And this way we have an end for our zipper that looks nice and neat in the side of our pouch. So again, I'm gonna pinch, use this hand to push that zipper to meet the top of my fold. Now once I have that pinched well, I can just stick a needle or pin through there and hold that tight. You can use a clip. I've seen where people cinch the lighters on the end. Pins work really well for me. So the same thing. Now to get it even, I push this side back to fold where we folded this one. Going to pinch so it's even with the pinch on this side. Use my left hand to push the zipper into my finger, lining that fold up with my zipper teeth. So it's pretty even, but it is a little high on this side. So I'm going to move my pinch mark down just a tad, pinch, and fold. Again, pinch, and fold. You can just stick a pin in to hold it in place while we sew it together. So now we need to hold this together. We want to stitch as close as we can to this edge so it's not visible, holding these pieces together. But we need to make sure that we're stitching to hold this piece down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my foot and I'm going to drop my needle right at the top of the pinch mark, just below the zipper teeth. That way my zipper is already over the hump. If I try and start too far back, it's going to give me trouble and your machine may struggle. Now that the needle is down, I can take out my pin because the needle is holding that zipper in place, and I'm just going to stitch forward to the end of our flap and backstitch all the way up, and that's it. That will hold our zipper in place. So the same thing with this side, just past the zipper teeth. I'm going to drop my needle in. The pressure from the presser foot will hold everything in place along with the needle. And now we can stitch. I run all the way to the bottom with my stitches first and then back stitch back up. If I try and back stitch too close to here, it's just going to jam everything all up. So go ahead and stitch down 3 or 4 stitches before you back stitch. So just forward and back and forward. And that'll give you a few good stitches to hold in place there. And do the same thing for my other zipper. We just want to clean up any extra threads here that we have so they don't get stuck in the zipper later. So now we can trim the extra zipper teeth off. And always with zipper teeth, we want to singe the ends so it doesn't fray. And I want to catch some of those little threads as well so that, like I said, it won't catch in the zipper at our later step. If you fray or if you burn some of your zipper, just make sure to cut that off too. And now we have our 2 zipper pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and attach our zipper first. And I'm going to attach my zippers before trimming them down to the right size. And I'll show you why in just a second. Add our zipper pull on the same way we did earlier. And add those. Now when our zipper gets to the top, we want to make sure that they're even. And they look really good. Let's just say that you have one that's a little wonky. Say that it looks a little like this, where one side's maybe a little higher than the other. What we need to do is make sure we can adjust those teeth at the bottom. So by leaving the extra zipper tape and not cutting it short now, we can adjust that by a few teeth. So we're just gonna unzip it, and this side needs to go down. So we're gonna pull those teeth up first. So we're gonna slide these up. And then make them a little more even, and that will bring you closer together. So you kind of just mess with your teeth down here so that we can make the tops even. Once you have them even, you can cut down to the zipper length that's required by the pattern. Now, since I am doing an all vinyl exterior, I do like to cut my zipper a little bit shorter. I cut it between 1/8 and 1/4 and 8 inch and 1/4 and 8 inch and 1/2. And that's because that'll give us some extra room with our all vinyl zipper tabs and the vinyl at the bottom. Sometimes it's just a little too tight with the vinyl exterior. So I'm going to cut those down to about 8 1/4. And we had some extra room with these teeth to play with. So again, like I said, no worries at all if your teeth are uneven from folding it. take the time to make it right. It'll be worth it. Singe the bottom and just double check to make sure that they're even. Good enough. So now to add our zipper tabs. And again, another trick that I've learned with making all vinyl tabs. We're going to place our tab face down onto our zipper. I'm going to stitch that on at 1/4 of an inch, just like normal. Now here's my trick. I don't fold this into 4 because again, it can get super bulky when you have these 4 layers at the base and you're trying to turn that bag. It just makes it really thick. I fold this over and I top stitch it down. Just like we would for a regular zipper tab. So now here's the trick. I come back in and I cut this flap off just past our stitching. So you may ask, well, why do you not trim it down shorter? Well, because it'd be really pretty impossible, or you'd be more than likely to stitch off the back side of that. So I just leave that extra bit and cut it off after I'm sewing, and then you're not going to have it fall off or miss stitches in such a small area. So again, we're going to go face down, stitch on at 1/4 of an inch. And I do this on almost all of my exterior vinyl zipper tabs because no one's going to look in your bag and see that. Fold it over to 1/3. Get it as snug as we can up against the end. If you need to add a clip, feel free to do so, or double-sided tape. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. So again, now we're just going to cut off the excess just above that stitching. And then you have a 3-layer tab instead of 2. And there you have our 2 zippers. Now we need to work on our D-ring tabs. Like I mentioned earlier, I do add 2 D-rings for the crossbody strap. So I have doubled our strap and we will cut this in half. If it's a thin vinyl or stretchy vinyl, I do add some sort of stabilizer to these tabs so they don't rip out. This one is a pretty sturdy, thick vinyl, so I think we will be okay. And I will just go ahead and use them as is. Again, this part can be pretty thick when sewing it together, so if you don't need interfacing, I don't think it's necessary on these pieces. So I'm going to mark the middle. And I'm going to add double-sided tape down each side of the center line. If you haven't already, go ahead and fold this piece in half. Give it a nice good crease in the middle here so that when we're top stitching, we can back stitch really well. So when we cut it in half, it doesn't make our top stitching looser or fray later on. So I'm going to peel back our double-sided tape and fold over to our center line. And now we're going to top stitch down the sides of each, back stitching really well at our center mark that we just folded. Turn around and go down the other side. And then we'll go ahead and fold this in half and cut our 2 tabs. So now we're going to work on our front pocket. Another thing that I have done after making so many of these is I have cut a smaller piece of Decaville Light just on the front facing side of our pocket, so that when I add my magnet and my nameplate on the front, it has a little bit more substance to it so that it's not as flimsy. And again, it's just on the front panel side out of the seam allowance of that front pocket. So we're going to fold that in half, and we are going to top stitch our front pocket at 1/8 of an inch. So now that we have our front pocket top stitched, we need to add our magnetic snap, and I'm going to add my nameplate. So we need to mark our center line, and I'm going to show you what I call sewing with tape. I'm just using regular masking tape that I get from Dollar Tree, just pretty super plain masking tape, and I'm going to make a mark for my snap here and my tag down here, and I need to mark the center. As I've said in some of my other videos, to get an accurate middle mark, we need at least 3 lines to line up. So I'm going to split this in half, and I'm going to make a few marks. And that way, if for some reason you didn't measure correctly and it's slightly off, it'll make it center no matter what. So if you just take the measurements that you think it is all the way up, then it may be slightly off, and then you're going to be off center. So now I have my 3 marks, and I can line up my ruler to these 3 marks and get my center line. My magnetic snap is going to be the top here. And there gives us our center point for that as well. For my name tag at the bottom, I like it to be 2.5 inches up from the bottom. So I'm going to place my tape there, mark out 2.5, lining up the center point on our center line, the bottom across, and that'll get us an even line here. So now I can just place my nameplate backing even on our line, lined up with the center, mark the holes I need, and do the same thing for our magnet. Center up our crosshair and mark our lines there. So now we need to cut out our slots, and to do that we want to make sure we remove our back flap so we're not cutting through that. Just using an X-Acto knife to mark those slits, and then we can remove our tape. Add our snap here. Right now I prefer using Therxfuse. It is self-adhesive, so, and it's kind of Decaville lighty fleece feel. That way you can just peel off the back. Stick it right over your tags, and it's not going to leave a mark or wear through your material on the other side of the flap. And I like adding Decaville light to this panel here so that you can't see any of that when it's less likely to pull through from our main flap. So now that that is complete, we can take one of our front panels and we can baste this down onto our front panel. Back stitching over where our pocket meets the back piece. Across the bottom. And back up this side. Okay, now we can put that aside and we need to work on our flap. Okay, for our flap, I have gone ahead and drawn our seam allowance on. I have a whole separate video on how I draw these seam allowances on. Also, if it is a pattern that you make often, I have reached out to some designers, got the okay, and had acrylic templates made so that I can draw on the seam allowance nice and easy. So if it's a pattern that you make a lot, reach out to the designer, see if they're working with someone who makes acrylic templates so that you can simplify your process. There's no reason why you should have to struggle on a step every single time on something that you've made. When I've started making these a lot last year, I was like, okay, this is where I struggle the most. What can I do to make this part quicker? And for me, it was coming up with this template with the seam allowance on it. So I could quickly just say, okay, this is what I need to do. So my corners could be even every time. But if you don't have the ability to get an acrylic template, if the pattern designer doesn't allow it, that's fine. I made a whole separate video on how to do it with just a basic ruler. So now we just want to stitch our seam allowance on this flap. Back stitching well at the beginning and end. Go nice and slow around corners. If you need to pick up your foot and hand walk it, you could do that. Just slowly, stitch by stitch. The more you get to know your machine, you'll build confidence and be able to go quicker. But it's not a race. So now that we have our flap stitched, we want to check, make sure everything looks good. If you need to restitch a certain area because you came off the line, do that. You can always go inside your line and you won't see it. So another thing that I've learned when top stitching flaps and things like this with thicker areas is we want to make sure that we're not cutting the seam allowance too short on the side. When we cut it too close to the stitch line, once we flip this back, we don't have enough area to top stitch here. It also makes our foot very uneven. So let's just say this is folded. This area here gives you a nice place for your foot to ride. If we were to cut this and you have a wide foot, it's just going to teeter off of this. So you're either likely to keep falling off of this side here or fall off the outside here. So I do like to leave the side areas a little bit thicker in the seam allowance. We do need to trim down the corners, and the bottom is, you can trim a little bit off the bottom, but these sides, I do like to keep sides on a lot of my flaps just so that we don't encounter falling off the edge of something too small. Now, if you had a really big seam allowance, something maybe like a 1/2 inch, then I would maybe trim some down, but we don't want to make it so small that our foot falls off. So I'm going to take picking shears and right about this area in here, I'm going to come and round those corners. I'm going to come off the edge there, and then I can use my regular scissors to cut across the bottom here. That still gives us nice clean corners without sacrificing our sides here. Now for this next part, we need to turn our flap right side out. I do not turn anything vinyl or interfaced with Decaville Light without using a blow dryer. And I just use a regular blow dryer that I have at home. It's one that's kind of been retired. It's not even one that I use on a regular basis. I put it on hot and I just set it down on the surface that I'm working on, kind of angled towards me, and I turn the flap. I don't know if I'll be able to get that in the shot here, but I just turn it on and work the flap once it starts to get warm. Just finish working out your corners, kind of rolling those seams. If there's anything kind of maybe poking out from the stitches, you can kind of use your nail just to poke it back in and kind of press it together. Kind of working the seam to get it nice and flat. once we have our flap all pushed out, we need to top stitch at an 1/8 inch all the way around our flap. If you need to, you can do a little more than an 1/8 inch just so you don't have to run off the edge. And again, you should have a nice flat surface on the inside of our flap where we left a little bit more of that seam allowance to make coming around the sides much easier. Just like stitching the inside of the flap, go nice and slow and back stitch at the beginning and end. Alright, and now we have our flap top stitched. You can pick the side that looks best. I'm going to go with this side, and we need to add the other half of our magnetic snap. Since we want this side to be the top, I'm going to flip it over. And again, we're going to mark our center line. Because our flap can be unsymmetrical, because let's face it, we're all not perfect, we're going to mark our 3 halfway points. So get a little bit smaller down here. We want to scooch it in just a little bit more. And now we can line up our points, get a pretty accurate center line. Because I'm using a bigger snap than the one the pattern calls for, I am going to put the center point at 5/8 inch from the stitch line. So I'm going to put my 5/8 at the stitch line, line up my center line, and give us our center point here. This part can get a little tricky. We need to mark our side lines first. And stick your hand with your fingers kind of at a V open to keep it from going through, kind of like an oven mitt, and we're going to cut our marks for our snap. Now that we have that, remove our tape, add our snap. And for this part, I like to use hemostats to grab my backer and slide it right on. Alright, so now we need to cover our snap. I'm going to use the piece of Therxfuse, grab it with some hemostats, open it up, and push it down. And now our flap is complete. So for our flap, I'm going to take our magnet, connect them together, line up the flap as straight as we can, and clip it at the top. Now we need to baste across the top. I like to backstitch a little bit extra here to secure it. Okay, so now we have our zippers, our D-ring tabs. Okay, so now we have our front panel, our back panel, our zipper pocket, our card slots, and our other lining pocket. We need to take our zippers and our front pocket and our back pocket, and we need to mark 3/4 of an inch from all 4 sides. You want to use a pen that will be able to see in the seam allowance. We're going to work with our front panel first, and we're going to place our zippers face down with the top edge of the zipper at our line here and the bottom edge of our zipper tab just above the mark that we did there. And this is why I like to cut my zipper a tad bit shorter, so that the bulk of the vinyl will still be just above those lines. You do not want them to go above or below these lines, or it's going to be really hard to turn and will get stuck in your seam allowance. So we're going to clip these on here, and we're going to baste those down with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And if you have a short zipper, I recommend lining it up with the top marks and giving yourself extra room on the bottom, so that way when you turn, the bulk of your zipper tab will have more room. You don't need as much space to turn because it's so thin at the top of the zipper, so you'd rather have more bulk room at the bottom. Make sure your zipper's out of the way, and we're just going to baste this down. If you need to, move that zipper pull out of the way, because we want this zipper to be straight, lined up as best as we can without pulling tight. As straight as we can keep this zipper will be how straight it is when the final bag is complete. If you get kind of a wavy zipper, it could be because you just kind of shifted here a little bit. So you may need some double-sided tape or a lot of clips. Make sure this zipper end isn't kind of cockeyed here. We want it straight. This pattern does call for a number 3 zipper. I have made this pattern with both. I don't have a preference on either one. I just use whatever zipper pulls and zipper tape that I have that matches at the time, whether it's a 3 or a 5, and I don't do anything different with the seam allowances at all. So now that we have this side done, we're going to work with our right side zipper, and I'm going to take our zipper pocket and I'm going to put it face down onto our zipper panel. Clip this down, and we want to make sure our zipper for our zipper pocket is close to our zipper here. We don't want it to be on this open end or your pocket will be upside down. And this is kind of where I mentioned here trimming this extra piece of fabric keeps it out of the seam allowance of the zipper and reduces the bulk a little bit. We're going to stitch down this. Using 1/4 of an inch or how close you can get to the zipper. I don't use a zipper foot here, so I just go as close as I can to the zipper tape without having to use my foot. We do want to be careful on this side. We do have 2 pulls to worry about. We have our front pull and we have our zipper pocket pull. So I'm going to start at the top. When I get here, I'm going to stop and readjust my zipper so that they're out of the way. You should have enough clearance with your flap here, but if you don't, you may need to unpick a couple stitches to get the clearance for your foot. Starting at the top, we're going to go over our zipper, back stitch a couple stitches over our back stitch a couple stitches over our zipper, and continue sewing down. Now we're reaching our zipper pulls. I'm going to reach under, move those out of the way. And continue on. back stitch at the end. So now we have our zipper pocket and our zipper. This can get a little thick depending on your vinyl because we have your back panel, your zipper, and your zipper pocket. So we would have additional fabric here as well if we didn't cut that out before. So we need to crease this really well. And we're going to top fold the seam allowance back towards our front panel. And we're going to top stitch from here down on the vinyl side or the front pocket side. So if you have a domestic machine, this part is going to be the thickest, bulkiest part. So you can do a couple things to reduce the bulk here. You can do a cotton pocket. If you really want a vinyl pocket, you can stitch together so that the back side of this front pocket is cotton. You can do an all cotton pocket and back. You can add this pocket here as a cotton woven pocket, or backside rather. And you can definitely make sure that if you interface this front pocket, it's out of the seam allowance, because that would be here as well. Other than that, it's a pretty simple, just kind of tricky. And I think I am going to pick a couple stitches out of my baste here so that I can move that flap up out of the way to top stitch. Reaching under to make sure that our seam allowance is pushed towards that front panel. And that zipper tab is another reason why I only do the 3 layers there. Also with domestic, you can change this out for a woven or even a raw edge zipper tab. So now we have that top stitched. We are going to take a plain lining, not our card slots. Our card slots need to go with our zipper pocket. We're going to place that on this side. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. We want to make sure our zipper is out of the way here. And if you need to remove a few stitches of your seam allowance of the flap, you can do so there to kind of pull it out of the way. It does look like it got a little wonky there, so I just want to see if it was me, or we'll see what's going on here. So now we need to do the same thing on this side. And why we alternate back and forth is so that we can get an easy top stitch on this front panel. When we add the back panel, the top stitching can get a little tricky, so at least it won't be visible if you mess up. Again, we're folding this. Making sure our seam allowance is folded towards the back and our pocket is out of the way. Once you get the first couple stitches started, it's easier to manipulate the seam allowance. Didn't think I needed to take out some stitches there, but without my zipper foot, getting pretty close. All right, so now we have our front panel complete. We need to tuck back our linings, and we're going to baste our back panel face down onto the zipper. We're going to take those marks that we marked before, and just like we did for the front side, I'm going to line them up in between and baste that zipper down. Double check my marks. This panel may be a tad bit larger. I'm going to try and adjust and make sure everything's even. The zipper is flat. Move our zipper pull out of the way. And we want to take our card slots with the pockets facing up, face down, so again, I trimmed this here when we were top stitching that down because it lines up right with our zipper end and that our zipper tab, and that can kind of create some bulk, so it should be a little bit thinner there for you. Zipper pulls out of the way. Now we need to open this up and we need to top stitch along our back panel. So we have our front panel and then we have our card slots and our zipper pocket, and it should be facing each other. If you mix them up and you want to put your card slots with a blank lining, then that's fine. We just want to make sure that the zipper opens and you can get to your card slots this way, and that your zipper pocket is here. If your zipper pocket is down here or your card slots are upside down, you won't be able to get into them. So double check them now. So this is the side we're going to top stitch, folding our seam allowance towards the back, and this side's going to be a lot thinner and easier because we don't have any of the bulk front pocket. Okay, so now we need to take our back panel and we're going to knead it right sides together with our other side zipper. We're going to line up our zipper with the marks that we had made. And base that down to our back panel. So again, you should have your card slots, your zipper pocket, your blank lining panel, your front, and your back. We're going zipper face down onto our back panel. Slide this zipper down. Okay, so now you should have one lining piece, and that's going to go face down onto the zipper that we just worked on. So it should be right sides together with your other lining piece. Zipper out of the way. So now you should have your two lining pockets, your front and your back facing each other, and your opposite card slots and your zipper pocket together. Now the tricky part is we need to top stitch the side we just finished. So we need to unzip everything and fold our seam allowance back towards our back piece. And it's going to take a little bit of manipulating under your machine, but we're going to top stitch along this back seam here. It's okay to move, manipulate, go slow, and top stitch that back end. If you've seen other videos or people referencing the patterns change, the videos don't match, the only construction part that changed is we top stitched this first. The original pattern had you top stitching it on the thick front panel at this step. Now it's a lot more easy to manipulate stitching on the back. So if you were to mess up, it would be on the bottom back side instead of on your front main panel. That's the only thing that's different as far as construction goes for this bag. But we want to start on the front, at the top, go nice and slow, back stitch. And get as far as you can before we have to start manipulating. And just do a couple stitches at a time. Make sure your seam allowance is to the back side. Scrunch everything up. Just a couple stitches at a time. Watch out for your zipper. And back stitch. Make sure your needle's up as high as you can and your presser foot, and carefully slide out without catching your needle. And that's the hardest part of this bag, is top stitching that seam. But check it. Should be pretty good in there. And we have a little bit of wiggle room too with your seam allowance when we close it up. So if you have any wonky stitches down there, they'll probably be hidden anyway. So now we need to take our D-rings, add them to our D-ring tabs. And I like to put a little piece of double-sided tape to keep them together. You can baste them if you'd like. Just needs something to hold them together. Now we're going to turn it around, and we're going to add our D-rings to our flap here. If you're choosing to add the strap, you'll add your strap now on this end, and it will be loose inside the bag as we stitch it together. So to make them even, I just mark the same amount down each line here. And I use that mark to line up the height of each one. I do like to add some double-sided tape here to keep them from moving. We're going to be sewing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so you should not sew into this tape, and it'll help keep them nice and straight. And as well, this tape will help us keep our seam allowance, and as well this tape will help keep our seams lined up here. We want to match our back panel to our front panel. Clip. Same thing with this side. Back panel. Clip. And then I kind of use that tape here to hold these in place so they don't shift when we go over them. So that double-sided tape right in here will help us keep our D-ring tabs nice and straight. And we can see our line here so we know if they shift while we're sewing where they need to be. So now at this point we're going to go to the bottom. Clip our bottom seams together. And then we're going to make sure our zippers are open. But I do like to pull them up just a tad so they aren't pinching our zipper down here. So we're going to line these up. And you can see here where we may have cut our stitching off when we trimmed it shorter. We just want to make sure we're going to backstitch really well over those to keep them from coming undone later. Now we do need to leave a hole in one of the linings to turn the bag through. I like to leave it on the lining side without the card slots or the zipper. So it's going to be this side over here. We're going to sew around the edges now, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here, gradually getting a little bit tighter to 5/8 as we go around our lining panels, leaving an opening here to turn. We're going to sew around the exterior. Our main body panel, we want to sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance and gradually getting larger to a 1/2 inch seam allowance as we go around to our lining pockets, leaving an opening here to turn. As we get closer to our top, we're going to switch over to 3/8 of an inch. And if you need to use a hump jumper in this area, I just have a big piece of vinyl that has lasted me forever that I really like to go up and over, making sure our D-ring tabs are straight. And a couple stitches into the lining, I'm going to move over to a 1/2 inch. So I cross over these threads. I'm going to backstitch well to hold them in place from unraveling later. Close, we're going back to 3/8, sorry. You may need to use your hump jumper to get over that seam. And as we go down, back to a 1/2 inch. Turn. And now we've sewn all the way around. I do like to go back and sew a second line just underneath our bottom and our top, about 1/4 inch in from the side seams. I don't want to get too close because I don't really want to pinch those zipper tabs. Just for a little extra security. And same with the top. I like to reinforce these D-ring tabs, going over the edge a few times. And the reason why I don't do it on the first go around is because I don't want to perforate those tabs. I don't want to give them a weak point to tear. So they'll bear all the weight on these seams up here, and then the top ones will just hold them in place. I do like to leave a little bit of length on my tabs so that it does have some structure inside the bag once it's turned. We need to trim our seam allowance down around the edge. I do not trim my seam allowance here, but I do cut these corners in a little bit if I can to kind of reduce the bulk in these areas here. We want to make sure to leave our ends here to be able to fold that. The lining, we want to get super close so that it fits nice and snug on the inside, and I want to avoid trimming those stitches there. Trimming this lining nice and tight will help it fit really well on the inside, because we need this to be smaller than our seam allowance here. If we leave too much fabric, it's not going to fit inside our seams here. So just like I did before with the blow dryer, I'm going to heat up our panel here so we can turn it inside out. I'm going to work it from our card slots and pocket all the way through, but heating it up will really help loosen up our front pocket and our vinyl and our interfacing. So you can kind of look inside here, and we just really need to smooth out our card slot pockets in there. Make sure they're on the back side of our tabs, or at least on the same side as our tabs. Get our pocket flattened. And then our money slot. Just really tighten it down in there. By trimming that seam allowance really tight on the lining, we're able to get a pretty smooth fit. Just kind of working this side in there. And just really smoothing it out. If you're having trouble getting the lining smooth, flip it back out and do a tiny bit smaller seam allowance on the lining, and it'll give you a little bit better fit. But once it's all in there and you have items in here, it'll really smooth itself out. So now we just need to close up our bottom here. give this pocket a little press and tuck it back in. Just gave that pocket a quick press. Let's tuck it back. Make sure to roll this side in pretty good. Your D-ring tabs. And now we just need to make the crossbody strap and we'll be finished. Okay, now for the final step, we need to make our crossbody strap. I like to make my crossbody straps at 62 inches. However, most vinyls aren't 62 inches long, so we need to piece those together. In order to do that, we're going to take our two ends and we need to piece them together here. So first we can mark out on our short end 3 inches, which is how wide our strap is. It's a 3/4 inch strap. So I'm going to mark 3 inches and I'm going to draw a diagonal line to the opposite corner. 3 inches. And then in an L shape, we're going to piece these right sides together like so. We add a couple clips. We're going to stitch from the corner of this line to the corner of this line. What that's going to do is allow us to flip this piece down and join together right at that corner mark with our piece that we have. Because this has a little bit of funky ends, I'm just going to go ahead and trim it a little shorter. So that way we line it up. Now when we get that stitch, it'll fold perfectly into itself, giving us a longer strap. Okay, so now we want to push our seam open. And And we want to trim a good amount off our seam allowance, but we still want to give us some room so that when we fold down our strap in half, we have a little bit of extra room to hold that down. So now we'll open our strap. And it should be pretty close to lining up. If it's a little off, that's okay. We can fix it in the next step. Just gonna trim this corner off here. So now what we need to do is mark a center line all the way down our entire strap. When we get to this area, we want to open up our seam allowance, use our ruler to kind of hold it flat, and mark. So we get to the little area that's a little off. We just want to angle it and line it up the best we can, and it'll grade in naturally as we piece it together. So now I'm going to use double-sided tape along both sides of my strap line that I just drew. Keeping it about an 1/8 inch, a little more than an 1/8 inch away from my center line so that we don't stitch through it when we're top stitching. Again, when we get to the seam here, push the seam allowance open and continue on. Do the same thing on this side. Pressing that seam open the best we can. Now we need to fold our strap to our center line. I do like to leave a small gap so that I can visually see my line in between. And that just allows some room for the vinyl to crease, especially with thicker vinyls. If we really meet these two sides too close together, when you go to fold it, you may get some bunch up in here. So I do like to leave just a little tiny gap about the width of the pen mark that we drew, so I can see that pen mark the whole way down. And I'm just using my left hand to pre-fold the fabric for me as I get closer to that line. Now here's where we were a little off when we joined it, and that's okay. We're just going to push up as close as we can, and it'll gradually fit right in there. If you have a little bit extra there that bunches over, you may need to trim that off. So we're just going to continue on all the way down our strap. Using my left hand as a guide and my right hand to push onto the tape. So the left hand kind of guides ahead, pushes on the tape. And that really helps keep it lined up without getting any bunches or stretching in your vinyl. And then now we're going to flip around and do the same thing on this side. Leaving a small gap between the two. Making sure that seam's pushed open really well. Just really push that seam good. There's a little bit of extra seam in here. Just go ahead and cut that out, and then that'll make it fold a little nicer. Now we need to do one more strip of double-sided tape, and again I'm going to run it just in the inside of 1/8 from the edge so that we're not top stitching through it. But I do want it closer to the edge instead of the middle. That way it can really hold and not shift while I'm stitching. Now that that tape is on there, we're going to peel that off. And this should fold nice and easy in that crease that we left. And we're going to carefully line up the edges all the way to the end. Now we need to top stitch down both sides of our strap. I like to start out by working with the end that we've attached the extra piece to, and that end's gonna stay raw. You can choose to put a strap end on it if you'd like. You can choose to edge paint it, or you could even just take a color matched Sharpie if you'd like and just kind of color in the ends, and it will match a lot better than the raw edge, and you won't be able to tell. So I do prefer to have something on the ends versus raw ends, but for the purpose of this, we're just going to color it in. And then cinch the threads with the lighter. Back to work on this end here, and we need to attach our slider. So to do that, we're going to grab our hardware, and I pre-pull everything out before I start making a bag so that I don't run out. Okay, we're going to be working with our end that we've attached our extra piece to add our slider. I'm going to take my strap rivet guide that we designed to help make straps easy, and you're going to line it up with the inside solid lines, and that's our 3/4 inch line, and along the bottom. So we're just going to make sure everything's even. And for the slider, we use the furthest apart holes, C and A. So we're going to mark C and A. We're going to take our punch tool and we're going to punch these holes out. using a cam snap press and 9x9mm rivets. We're going to take our slider, weave it through, and the long side of the rivet I like to put on what we call the pretty side, because this would be our back side, through the holes. Put our cap on. Line this up in our press and secure that rivet. Now the way we designed the strap rivet guide is to have enough room here so that you're not catching the press on the metal here. You have enough room for your dies to sit in here and not interfere with this piece. So next we need to take our opposite strap end, or opposite end of our strap. Make sure it is not twisted. So with our strap, just like we put this on, we're going to slide one of our swivel hooks onto our strap. Then the same end is going to weave through our slide adjuster. Just like so. So now we have one end of our slider, of our swivel hook with our slider. So now we need to attach our second swivel clasp to this side of our strap. So using our strap rivet guide, if you're not going to put a strap end on this side, you can line it up to the bottom and use C and B. However, we're going to add a strap end. So what we need to do for that is we need to add our swivel hook onto our strap first, because once we put the strap end on, we're not going to have any room to add that over it. So you're going to end up having to take the screws out, put them back in. This slides on the edge here. And using a small screwdriver, we're just going to screw on this strap end. It adheres with 2 screws, so you just want to make sure your strap was pushed all the way in and everything is straight. Don't drop your screw, because if you drop your screw, then you'll be like me and have to search for it forever. But we found it. Okay, so now our strap end is on and secure. Strap end is on. We're going to take our strap rivet guide and again line it up with our inside solid lines, our 3/4 inch line, and butt it up to our strap end here. For this strap connector, we're going to use B and C. For this swivel hook, we're going to mark C and B. And we're going to punch these out. Now we can slide our swivel hook between our two holes that we just punched, fold it down, and add our rivet. Again, the long side's going to go in the pretty side. And put our cap on the back side. So once that's snapped, again, the holes give us the perfect markings to be able to fit in our press without having to worry about hitting the connector, the strap swivel hook, or our strap end. So now our strap and our bag are complete. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial of the Zip and Go. If you have any questions, please drop them below. And of course, if you make one, we'd love to see. We are on Facebook at Creating with Joleelee, and you can find us on our website at JoleeleeCreations.com. Thanks, we'll see you soon.